Hey y'all, my name is Batalino Bumelelo, and today I would like to do a reading for you if you're interested. I have a particular topic that I'm going to delve into, and I'll just be using some tarot and oracle cards to get some insights as to how to navigate this subject or aspect of life, and to get some insights as to how to incorporate it into your daily experiences. So I hope you enjoy, and let's get into it. For today's reading, I'd like to channel some insights into the experience of grief. I feel particularly called to speaking about this because of the collective and individual shifts and changing that is happening because of planetary or astrological events, as well as societal shifts that are occurring from politics, from culture, from all aspects of society. I am also particularly called to this because I feel like there hasn't been a sort of consciousness expansion as surrounding the topic and experience of grief. Grief is something that often makes us feel very vulnerable, very sensitive, and very emotional because of its deeply discomforting and often painful nature. And so many of us shy away from or completely avoid experiencing grief and allowing it to really deepen our understanding of humanity and life as a human being. So I'd like to use the tarot and oracle decks to just kind of see how I can navigate discussing this topic on a more energetic and spiritual level, especially for people who are going through a self discovery, spiritual or healing journey, or even a deconstruction journey, and have to tackle grief because grief is often something that comes up when you go through this intentional journey of dismantling things that you thought about yourself, things that were told to you about how you should be, or even as far as navigating a life path that you were told to go through and that you find out is not meant for you or is not suitable for you and your truest expression of self. So I'm going to just pull some cards because I don't want to spend too much time yapping. Otherwise, I'll just have to make a video on grief on its own. So I'm just going to start by pulling some cards and seeing how we can flow through the channel that will open up when we start to speak about this topic. I hope you enjoy this reading and it appeals to you. And if you resonate, I appreciate that you watch this video. So I've got my deck and I'm just going to shuffle and let the cards come out as they do, and then we'll see how the universe would like to direct this particular channel into the experience of grief, and then I'll make the interpretations that come up and allow also the particular thoughts, feelings that I can channel come up. So let's get into it. Okay, I'm just going to work with these few cards that I have out now and get a picture of what we can really start by saying to illustrate. Okay, so the first card, don't judge my cards, please. The first card is the Seven of Wands, and then we have the Knight of Cups. We also have the King of Pentacles, and then Death, which seems pretty relevant, as well as the Hanged Man. Right off the bat, with the Death card, it's very relevant to this topic of grief. Grief can happen through or from experiencing a specific loss of somebody important or a loved one passing on or transitioning. And the experience of grief can be extremely palpable from that experience of loss. But in tarot, death often sings, sorry, it often signals to some sort of change, and it doesn't have to be good or bad. It just is centered around change as a whole. And so grief can also be experienced through change, right? Um, Loss is kind of the major or the more prominent reason for grief. So, loss of an important person or a loved one, loss of a home, loss of a car, loss of a job, loss of a place that has sentimental value, pretty much anything that has sentimental value or provides emotional safety or security to you. Once you lose that thing or access to it, then you can experience grief, right? And grief doesn't always or only produce emotional pain, it can be physical as well, and it can be mental and spiritual. Grief is kind of an all encompassing, very uncomfortable, very difficult, and painful experience. But I would like to expand on how grief can be seen, grief can be felt and experienced, and then also how it can be alchemized in the sense that the lessons learned in the experience, but also experiencing grief itself, looking at it in a different way to see that even as painful as it can be, it can also be a very beautiful portal into humanity, into deepening compassion, into um, deepening grace. It can be a very profound experience that allows you to feel more in, that allows you to embrace humanity more and be more grounded in the earthly experience and also in a spiritual experience. So it is quite obvious why the death card would appear when talking about grief because, I mean, it seems pretty morbid. It seems quite dark seeing this card in itself. But I think I can't say it's intentional on the part of the people who originally illustrated these cards of the tarot, but the way that the experience comes to you once you go through a particular change or a loss can often feel like a very dangerous, scary thing that's looming, a very dangerous feeling. But I, I particularly, let me say it like this, I have been challenged to see grief differently. Um, Challenged is the right word because it's definitely not easy to go through grief in itself, but then to also try to see how it can be positively experienced. It's not easy to try and make grief a good thing. And then also considering the fact that we're in this type of society that is built and structured in oppression, exploitation, abuse, and so many very, very harmful experiences to people as a collective and individually. Grief is something that is inevitable, but it's also something that is extremely avoided by people, not just because of, for example, capitalism requiring people to just numb themselves and to diminish their emotions so that they can focus on working and laboring for their survival. But it is also through how grief is depicted as such a really devastating experience that people tend to shy away from it because it's also quite vulnerable when you're going through something that really shatters your idea of life and the permanence of things, how permanent something can be, and the fact that life is really out of your control more than you can admit. Grief is something that people are quite sensitive about even talking about, let alone experiencing it. And so I challenge myself to see it in its rawest, truest form, and then also seeing how I can cultivate beauty, or at the very least, um, something that I can hold on to and say that I can allow myself the room or the space to experience grief, right? With the Seven of Wands, right? Like, go continuing from the point of the sensitivity that grief evokes within people. I think because of also the structures that we live under, people can get quite defensive. This is really it's a quite obvious depiction of feeling defensive, feeling like you have to have your guard up, or feeling that you have to protect yourself from some sort of outside or external attacks, right? This is really a perception thing. It can be true that you have to protect yourself from outside negative influences or direct attacks towards you, your identity, whatever it may be. But a lot of the time, especially if we're talking about grief, there can be a sense of having to toughen up and keep your guard up because of how sensitive and vulnerable it makes you. And in particular, considering, like I said, the structures and the systems that we live under, people are considered weak for having these emotions, for feeling impacted by loss or by change, right? And okay, and I even have like an example to actually work with. You see how over time, because of how oppressed peoples have fought to get liberation or to get rights or to be represented in society as humans, just in the same way as the people who have power or the oppressors have represented themselves. And when these changes now happen incrementally because of the work that the oppressed people are doing to change the structure of society. People are now, especially those who have benefited from oppressors' existence, they are tackling a particular grief that other people won't really know how to experience because it's not based on a tangible loss in the sense that the ancestors were fighting and suffering. It is based on a perceived loss, especially of power. And so this, change, this significant change, this shift in the power dynamic often brings up defensiveness, right? And you can see it in, people who are socialized as cisgendered heterosexual men, where they do not know how to engage with the grief that they feel over not being able to fulfill the roles of patriarchal conditioning, but then at the same time, the promised future of being able to have what the conditioning told them that they would have. And so now they become quite defensive when seeing that, if women or queer people, LGBTQIA plus people are able to live successful, aspirational lives, they become quite defensive. They become they project a lot of their anxieties onto these marginalized and oppressed people, and they believe that their ability to live a life that was never afforded to them historically is a direct attack on them. You see how I'm trying to, talk about this. Grief can do that to you if you do not acknowledge it, if you do not frame it in a way where you allow yourself that vulnerability, that sensitivity. If you feel like you have to have a guard up, then you will become more defensive than you would have been if you had just allowed the feelings and the process to go to happen, right? And so you have to allow yourself the vulnerability, right? The hangman often can be interpreted as a stagnation or stagnancy in someone's journey, but I've also been encouraged to view it more as a stillness, right? Because movement is just as important as stillness in one's life. You can't constantly be moving because you will burn out, but also staying still for too long makes you stagnate. You need the balance, of course. The particular thing about the hangman showing up in this, and I like it because of the fact that it is confirming my intuition about trying to reshape or reform or just expand. Thank you. Expand the way that we can talk about and navigate grief. The hangman, if you can see at the bottom there, there's the light coming from the head. This card often speaks to that stillness and that stagnation, allowing for maybe enlightenment, but even if it's not enlightenment or awakening, it can also be integration of lessons and how now you become I don't like to say elevated as if it's like climbing up a ladder of like enlightenment or something, but more so um, your sensibilities now start to expand, right? We before when you didn't integrate the lessons and you're just downloading the information, researching, listening to people going out there, you were just in the mode of collecting and collecting and collecting. You didn't really have the process to digest or the space to process and digest. And so when you are in a period of stillness and stagnation, it is often a moment and an opportunity for that type of growth that allows you now to expand into becoming someone who has this new knowledge base, this new wisdom to work with, right? And it feels like enlightenment, it feels like awakening. But it's often just you digesting all of this information that you have now collected over the path or the period of you moving about and learning, discovering, researching, whatever it may be. In particular with grief, right? I think it just speaks to when you do allow yourself that vulnerability and that space to just sit down, because obviously grief is something that deserves and honestly forces itself to be felt or forces you to feel it, right? If you suppress it, you will burn out or you will just become somebody that is very likely to be insecure. And I'm not trying to make this a good or a bad thing, it is just observation. You are more likely to be someone that is insecure, that holds on to trauma. And there's nothing wrong with holding on to the meaning. There's nothing wrong with holding on to the meaning that a particular experience of trauma has in your life. If you went through trauma or abuse as a child, you can always allow that to have significance in your identity or in your life, and it can have a particular meaning. But often, people who don't allow themselves to grieve going through experiences of trauma will are very likely to perpetuate it onto other people, because what it does is it often leads you to policing other people's experience of emotion or people's vulnerability or sensitivity. Like, it is a very true thing that if you don't allow yourself your humanity, then you are guaranteed to then not allow other people's expressions of humanity. And sitting still and being vulnerable allows you the space to be enlightened to the landscape, the emotional landscape that grief is. It's scary at first because being vulnerable in that way is often scary. But I think what I like about the hanged man appearing is that particular. I like it because with grief, when I say that, like, it often challenges you or even forces you to stop, right? It's depicted kind of in the fact that this hangman has no opportunity to let himself out of this bondage. I don't know a better word right now, but he can't untie himself out of this. So it's almost this aspect of a lack of control over having to stop, right? And thinking about the way that society has been constructed to now be extremely fast paced, right? With like how capitalism has now entrenched itself in everything. Stopping is often something that is frowned upon because it in and of itself is a deviation from the norm. And then also, if you allow that and you allow yourself to not be ashamed or not judge yourself for having to stop to prevent yourself from burning out, but then to also allow the grief to be processed, the enlightenment can come from now this new perspective that's being offered about whether it is even necessary to be moving at such a fast pace. Because if you integrate the fact that grief might be or is likely to be ongoing, or there will always be periods of grief, it will come time and time again, and you have to now make space for that in your life or make a room in your emotional landscape for grief, then you have to restructure your entire lifestyle or your entire identity even. And this is what this really speaks to, where it feels like a death at some point, a death of a version of you, or a death of the constructed version of you that you were told to be by society, where you have to navigate life being a hustler, or just like you have to adapt to the fast paced nature of capitalism, or you know, you have to put yourself in a particular box of not being vulnerable, not being sensitive, not having emotions to fit whatever circumstance that you're in. And you go through a period of grief that now forces you to stop, forces you to now deviate from whatever norm or to step outside of whatever box that you've been confined in. It can now even challenge you to look even further than just what the loss of that particular thing, person, place, home has done for your life. Now you are even challenged to see whether, you can maintain being that person that you once were, because now you might have to consider making room for grief as something that you'll have to experience for longer than you think you are capable of. The way that I read these two cards, we have the Knight of Cups and the King of Pentacles. I'd like to see them together because I think they can speak to many different things, right? And I'm also trying to shorten the yapping time that I had because, trust me, I can make a video for 2 hours. Um, but I gotta limit and be considerate. I like to see the Knight of Cups as a card of offering, and in tandem with the message that came through with this about being offered a new perspective, being enlightened, I think it also can speak to um, being offered a sense of an emotional gift. Grief is often seen as just pain and discomfort, but it can be an emotional gift, a profoundly deep blessing to experience, because not only does it allow you to then give yourself the space to be human, but now after you've done that, you can really then think about the different ways that you can allow yourself to be human um, as part of your life, because you are a human, more than just like, oh, when I'm grieving, I should be able to be vulnerable, I should be able to be emotional. You can then think about, oh, when I'm happy, how can I then tap into a more humanistic approach to that? And humanistic in the sense of removing all the barriers that society puts on how you can express yourself, the restrictions and constrictions, the necessity or expectation of it looking a certain way. Um, it can be an emotional blessing, a spiritual blessing, even to experience grief, because it can open up so many worlds and portals for you to then see more humanity, especially if you are on a spiritual self-discovery, healing, deconstruction journey. Grief is something that can be quite necessary and important to experience, but also the way that it can allow you to even change the direction that your lineage is going to go on if you intend to have children, right? So much of our trauma and abuse comes from people not acknowledging grief from their own experience of loss, trauma, abuse. It becomes a cycle. As we know in the spiritual community, we talk about generational cycles. A lot of them are mostly perpetuated because of a lack of acknowledging grief and then processing it safely and securely and with love and kindness and compassion. And so allowing yourself that experience is definitely a blessing, not just to you, but to many more people who encounter you and people that come after you if you decide to have children or if you decide to um, keep contact with your family and such. It is a blessing and a gift on so many levels, especially if you allow yourself to see it that way. It doesn't take away from the fact that it's difficult and that it's painful, but growth is painful in many different ways. Growth is challenging. That's why they are called growing pains, right? If you don't allow yourself to see it as like a gift, then you often end up being this type of person, right? Um, the more that you experience this trauma, the more that it pops up in the different people and places that you encounter, and you don't acknowledge it and then allow yourself to grieve, the more defensive and guarded you become, and you then become someone that can even get to a point of thinking that the world is out to get you. And trust me, I've been there. It's quite scary to be in that place. It's very scary to be constantly hyper vigilant of potential attack or potential harm that could be done unto you. And that's not to negate the fact that the world can be an extremely cruel and devastating place to exist in, but I really like to see it in a more grounded way that, like, a lot of the time this harm happens by people who believe that they have to preempt an attack. So let me say it like this. A lot of this harm is done by people who have experienced harm themselves and then normalize it, and then they don't allow themselves to grieve. And so then, because they have normalized it, then they would also think that it's normal to do it to other people, right? Because we are not vacuum. You cannot consider abusers or people who intentionally go out of their way to harm others in a vacuum, right? There are genetic predispositions that cause people to be this way, but more often than not, it is their own experience of abuse that allows them to justify abusing others. And so, going back to grief being a blessing, it can really open up a world to some level and sense of stability within yourself and groundedness, um, where you don't have to feel like the world is out to get you. And you can just consider the fact that it just so happened that you've gone through a particular loss, you've gone through a particular change that was very difficult for you, and you didn't have to necessarily. Like, some losses are not, especially if it's not an actual, okay, no, I can't even say that. Some losses aren't really able to be justified or rationalized. Like, you can't really make sense of it, either because it was intentional and it didn't have to happen, or because it was unexpected, right? But a lot of the time, considering the society we're in, some losses didn't have to happen the way that they did, and they didn't have to happen with a lack of, like, I would rather say it would have probably been much easier for that particular person to um, reconcile with that loss if they were already experiencing some level of groundedness and safety and material security. Allowing yourself to experience grief can really lead to more of a sustained success if that's what you're looking for. But sustained stability and security, right? Pentacles are the card of stability, security, material resources, etc., etc. But the way that I'm interpreting it for this conversation on grief, um, relates to just allowing the grief as a blessing as well. Making room for it more often than not can bring you much more stability than if you were to avoid it and numb yourself to it constantly. It can make you construct a better life for yourself where you know your needs are met. Because, like I said, when you become enlightened to or from grief, you can recognize so much more of your reality that is making life harder for you, right? Like, if you lose a parent, for example, losing a parent is devastating in and of itself, because you, especially if they were an important figure or a loved one to you, if they provided for you, cared for you, and made sure that you lived a very healthy, um, thriving life where they genuinely loved you for who you are, it can be devastating in and of itself. But if you consider maybe that you are a marginalized person who isn't really in a financially stable position, losing a parent can also then make you enlightened to the ways that you don't have that much support outside of that one person. And it can make you see so many of like these structural inequalities that happen. You know, if you're a black person who happens to lose a loving parent, right? You can see how much you have to struggle when it comes to funeral covers, when it comes to organizing the finances for that experience, organizing how you're going to then maintain a sense of stability materially after that. Like you can then see so much of the world just from experiencing that one loss, right? And so if you then take it into account and now start to really integrate the information, it can bring you to much more of a grounded reality that allows you to then really consider that new information that you previously weren't privy to before that significant event happened. So you can then become more sensitive to maybe like structural realities, you know, that that particular event was shielding you from seeing. And then try to find a way to accommodate yourself, knowing that these obstacles exist. Um, okay, I'm going to leave it at that for now. I'm just going to put these cards to the side and see if there are more insights, because I think that was kind of a really good picture that the universe gave us. Um, I don't want to make it too long, but I also feel like I don't want to limit the channel, right? So if this becomes long, so be it. I hope you enjoy. Um, because I have a lot that I like to say about these things. I have gone through them myself, which is why I want to share them. And I've also seen the impacts of these experiences on other people and how they've navigated them. And I've learned from other people's wisdoms. And I just feel like so many like expansive conversations can thrive from this. And so many people, geez, girl, so many people can be impacted by us being able to allow this vulnerability. Girl, relax. I just want one more card. I'm very symmetrical. So I did 5 cards in the beginning and I'm going to do 5 cards now. Okay, I'm just going to take that one. I mean, from the gate, I think this card really, the Ace of Cups, really speaks to opening up this new path of emotional fulfillment, right? The King of Pentacles, and funny enough, the Queen also came out. Queen of Pentacles came out to kind of speak to a material security that can be cultivated. But I think this Ace of Cups is really about the new way that you can learn about emotional fulfillment and love and kindness and compassion and all these things that make you emotionally secure. Grief can open up so much to that. And you can also, I love that the Page of Pentacles came out here, especially if you experience childhood trauma and abuse, neglect, all that. You can cultivate a love for yourself that was not present before, especially before that moment that you decided to be vulnerable with yourself. You can cultivate such a deep, deep love for yourself that you never saw externally and that you didn't feel like you were allowed to have for yourself. And I think this is why this card is here as well. It is a form of justice to be able to feel that love for yourself and then allow yourself to see that love available. I think I love to have I I'm just gonna say it straight. I appreciate grief so much because when thinking about it in the form of justice, I'm a black person in South Africa, and I'm a multicultural black person, right? So many of my ancestors come from different parts of South Africa, and they experienced oppression, targeted violence, forced displacement, mass murder, you know, things that they were never allowed to to see as bad and harmful, and then to be able to grieve those things. It is justice for my ancestors, for me now to acknowledge this trauma that we have experienced as a collective and that has been passed down through generations, and to give it that space. Something that they were never afforded, something that they highly deserved, something that they desperately needed was to go through the grief, to be human in that way. Because part of what the system does to you is strip you of that humanity from the get, and so many of our ancestors, as marginalized and oppressed people, were never granted the opportunity to see their pain. And so there's such a deep, deep love that can be cultivated not only for yourself or towards yourself, but to your inner child. Pages are the children or the childlike energies of the tarot. But also for all humans, even the oppressors. Because once you understand the capability that you have to internalize violence and then to see it as a state standard and a norm, and then end up perpetuating it even as somebody who's been oppressed, you understand that a lot of people who are oppressors were once oppressed themselves. It is a cycle. And you don't have to love them, even if you've expanded your consciousness to allow that compassion. You don't have to love them. You can love the essence of humanity that is cultivated from that. You can love the fact that you are allowing the compassion to begin with. You don't have to love your oppressor. Don't think that that's what I'm trying to say at all. And like I said, it opens up new worlds. It opens up new avenues for you to look at your life path, right? You become someone that opens up to living a life that you never thought you could. Because up until that point, if you never allowed yourself the grief, then you would have never thought there would be a version of you that goes through it and then survives it. Because it's the unknown, scary. That's what the death card was telling us earlier. It seems very dangerous when it starts to happen or it's coming around the corner or whatever, but it can turn out to be so much more fruitful and so much more expansive than you accounted for or even thought was possible. Um, with the Queen of Pentacles, I think it just is completing the pairing with the King of Pentacles that we saw earlier, and it's just talking about the sense of stability that can be cultivated um, with within the masculine form of stability or the masculine expression of it and the feminine expression of it. I'm not too much into kind of like thinking about masculine versus feminine. It's another thing that I've learned from my own experience that requires a video on its own. But when they come up in the readings, I'm not afraid to just let them be expressed. But yeah, the masculine expression of stability, security, material success would obviously be um, more financial, more rooted in like work aspects, right? In striving toward that stability. And then the feminine would kind of be like the more slow, soft, nurturing. Mind you, this is like within one person, both masculine and feminine are within one person. I'm not talking about separate people, but the vulnerable, vulnerable, but like secure in that vulnerability. That's the more feminine part of it. Like not being afraid to be sensitive, not being afraid. Like the Queen of Cups and the Queen of Pentacles are kind of very secure in that, right? But yeah, I just wanted to end this kind of descriptive aspect of the reading with the justice by saying you do so much for you and other people and the people that came before you. You do all of them justice by allowing the grief to happen, right? And with the Page of Pentacles, because now you allow, if you do, this enlightenment to happen. I think of pages as creative as well. They're both the childlike essence in the deck, and that childlike essence is often a very potent force to be able to cultivate creativity. If you make space for grief, if you make room for grief, you can often be challenged to be able to see life creatively, right? Life creatively. And this is often why the trope of the tortured artist is so relevant, right? Obviously, it's not necessary, but it is often through very like difficult, painful experiences that the most touching and profound art pieces are made. And that doesn't mean they're always sad, but there's a deeper expression of humanity that is cultivated through that grief. And a lot of, it's unfortunate, but a lot of the very well respected artists from all spectrums of art, a lot of them dealt with grief in a very palpable way and expressed that through their art. And they became famous or reputable or honored by humans in their respective societies because of channeling that much depth and emotion into a form that doesn't require or often doesn't require a level of intellectuality or rationality or thinking, but emotionality. But yeah, this one, you do a lot of people justice by allowing yourself the grief, yourself most, first and foremost, because you are doing something that your younger self or a previous version of you never thought was possible and always thought, maybe felt ashamed or felt like they didn't deserve to be human in that way. Okay, I like this reading. I'm glad I responded to the calling. So now I'm just going to use some oracle to just get a few insights as to, oh, wait, as to how to navigate this, what type of lessons can be garnered from the experience of grief. Okay. Okay, I think that's enough. A bunch of them fell out. I'm too lazy to continue. Oh man. See, this is why I love doing channeled readings. Because the cards just don't lie. Like, I'll be psychic like that, so give me my flowers. But, because I mean, come on, deep cellular healing, our truest energy, physical and emotional healing. What have we been talking about? Give me my flowers. You are not alone. Isolation, physical connection, community, and this is something that I really want to get into. I hope you can see. I'm just gonna maybe take it up a little bit to see the words. Big picture thinking, Pleiades energy, visionary, inspired ideas. um, a new earth, it's happening. Keep holding the vision. And lastly, actually, I want to get like two more. The Void, Stop, Embrace Winter, Great Cosmic Womb. This is about the Hanged Man that I was saying, where grief will force you to stop. I'm gonna get like two more cards because I just feel like it. I love this deck, and I love the way that it is always attuned to what I'm speaking about. Oh, oh, there's too many cards. There's too many cards. I get it though. The guys wanna, yeah, they have so much to say, just like me. Okay, I'll just pull them. Number one, and number two. Yeah, why wouldn't they say this? Okay, lastly, last two, before I get into it. Activated Earth, Power Places, Ley Lines, Trust Where You Are Led. And lastly, Water Your Garden, Nourishment, Body Care, Tenderness, Rest. I mean, okay, I want to start with this one because I said I would really want to get into this. Often, okay, I'm gonna pair it with this one. When you are like kind of forced to stop, right? Often, what we think about this vulnerable experience is that you also have to like go through it and face it alone, and that may be true, particularly when you have to limit the outside noise and really listen to your heart, your body, your soul, your spirit, just so that I like that the hangman is here. These insights can really be integrated, right? That can be necessary, but not for the whole period because you are human. You deserve community, you deserve support, a support system and structure in place of multiple different people who can provide you with love, nurturing, care, and, you know, stability. Because another thing is that you can go through such devastating grief that, like, you're unable to get out of bed in the morning to do basic things, um, like, being able to take care of yourself. It can be that difficult, and you deserve to be able to have someone that can help you with that. It's not something you can. It's not something to be ashamed of. The society is so individualistic that like you are expected to be able to do things even if you don't have the capacity to. You should be the one to do it for yourself, and it's good to be able to take care of yourself because I mean we are also experiencing the way that particularly cisgendered heterosexual men weaponize incompetence, weaponize inability or not being able to understand how to do basic things to make their partners do things for them that they could very well do for themselves. So it can be appropriate to tell someone that no, you should be able to do it yourself in that context more often than not. But outside of that, a lot of people are taking on so much responsibility on top of needing to grieve that you just have to have support. If you don't happen to have that, it is very, very scary and it's very, very draining and exhausting. I'm speaking from experience. It's devastating, right? But I think what these three cards, like the void, um, you're not alone, and water your garden, speak to is the fact that this is a process for you to learn how to love yourself. And loving yourself will need you to ask for help, take care of yourself, your basic needs, and slow the fuck down. That's love. In a society that is anchored in dismissing humanity on a fundamental level, loving yourself is doing what you would be judged for doing in many ways. Because they will judge you regardless, especially if you're a marginalized person. I don't know if you understand how deeply firstly, how deeply indoctrinated people are, but also because of them having experienced that type of judgment before, they then feel safe enough to do it to other people, even if you're not doing anything wrong, just because of the way you exist, just because of the fact that you exist. Very scary. These three things to me mean healing on a very deep level. That's why it says deep cellular healing. Healing on such a level that you fundamentally change the way that genetics are gonna present for the lineage, the people coming after you. If you decide to have children, it's like not obviously you're not gonna change everything, but because you've done this, you have changed like the possibility for so many things to be repeated, right? You've changed so much of the way that the children and their children and so forth, the way that the genetic generational trauma presents. And this is why a new earth comes out like this. Sorry, I have to check if my mic is on a lot because yesterday I tried to film and that girl literally said, "Oh, no, you're not." I said, "Oh, okay." Anyway, that's why a new earth, um, big picture thinking, and I hope you can see the words, and activated earth, trust the places where you're led. That's why this comes out, because when you heal on such a fundamental level that you actively change DNA, or at least genetic presentation and expression, you are creating a new community of people that essentially, I can't say have never existed before because nobody exists in a vacuum, but like a community of people that like are entirely different from how we've existed up until this point. Because taking into consideration the way that we exist currently and the fact that they will then navigate this world entirely different from how everyone is expected to, that's creating the new earth. You know what I mean? And so if you trust these, that's the big picture thinking. Firstly, before I go to that part, that's the big picture thinking where it's like, you're not just doing this for yourself. Of course, it's definitely for you first, but it's not just for yourself. And it's not just because of the people coming after you. It's like this justice, the way that I was talking about justice, where it's also about what your ancestors have endured, and the fact that what you are creating, the reality that you are creating by just allowing yourself to be human, is something that they never knew could be possible given the circumstances that they survived or did not survive. So you look at it as a thing of never forgetting where you come from, but never letting that become where you end up. You know, I ate that. That was a bar. It was a bar. But yeah, and I think in terms of this card, Trust Where You're Led, it's more like the intuitive aspect of it. If you can resonate with the spiritual aspect where sometimes if if you do believe in ancestors having a spiritual presence in your life, it firstly does validate the fact that you're not alone, right? But then you may think that the things that you are doing that okay, there's two ways that I'm interpreting this. The first is that if you believe in ancestors and them having a presence in your life and you being connected to them, often, especially those that are there for your best interest, often they will lead you to places, spaces, people, things that you may not understand why, but they, if you see the bigger picture, you will know that, oh, it was because this particular person was going to challenge me to see myself in a different way, it ultimately makes me become a better person to myself. And then another part is, or could be also that, like, your body in itself, right? Now that you allow these, especially when you take care of yourself and you slow down, there's more sensitivity to listening to your body, and then you are able to tune into like specific desires, specific like feelings, things that either were dormant or you suppressed, like you may have not known they were there, or you knew they were there but you didn't embrace them or follow them. And so, for example, if you as a kid liked um like you were socialized as a boy that you like playing with Barbie dolls, right? And then were punished for doing that, and you were told that boys don't play with girls' dolls or girls' toys, you know, as you get older and you maybe go through that grieving process and you allow yourself to listen to your body, those desires may come up. This is where it's like trust where you're led. Those desires may come up to like now engage with things that are considered feminine. It may not necessarily be specifically like playing with Barbie dolls if that's what you're interested in, definitely. But it can also just be feeling drawn to more feminine expressions, more feminine things that are considered feminine either way. Um, Having that desire to maybe paint your nails or do your nails at a nail salon, try out makeup, things like that, is this card is basically saying like encouraging you to trust the way that your body is leading you through this grief. But yeah, for the most part, I think grief is, if you can let it teach you, is a very wonderful blessing. Coming out of just a quite a difficult period in my life, I deeply appreciate that I allowed myself the capacity to grieve, because I think I would feel a lot more miserable given that I'm still like a young black queer woman in South Africa, navigating being someone that cannot conform in any capacity. If I didn't allow myself that grief, I would have become somebody that I don't think I want to be, in the sense that I wouldn't be doing myself and the people around me justice. Um, Especially knowing what my political beliefs are in terms of liberation. If I don't grieve, then am I really liberating myself? So I think it's a blessing. I think it's a level of freedom that all of us deserve, and that will really give us a very potent portal into a new world that many of us wouldn't have thought would be possible. A lot of us think that like the world is going to change from politics, and that can be true, but there's so much more that can be expanded through grief and grieving. Surprisingly enough, that was a really good reading for me. I enjoyed that. I really appreciate the insights that the universe provided for us today, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. I will put my details in the bio for my other channel, my TikTok, and my email if you're interested in readings. But thank you so much for watching all the way through. I genuinely enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. And if you resonate, thank you so much for expanding yourself and your view of the world in a way that allows you to be human. You are doing so much good work for yourself and for all of us. And I appreciate it. I value it. Even if you don't see the fruits of your labor, they are definitely there. It is a blessing to have somebody like you. And keep going. I don't know if I can tell you that it gets better, but I can tell you that you deserve to experience what it feels like to be free. So, thank you. I'll see you in the next reading and have a good day or a good night, whoever you are, wherever you are. I love you. Bye.